Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome co-founder, Creative Tech Week, Dawn Barber.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you again. This is the third day of the conference portion of this fabulous Smart Cities New York 2017. So we've had some beautiful weather the last 2 days, so I guess we deserve to have a little rain. We can deal with that, right? Still have a beautiful view, still in this amazing space. So these last 2 days, how's everyone enjoyed themselves? Have we all enjoyed ourselves? Have we had some great? It's been awesome. I just want to say I'm very proud to be here. I'm sort of part of the team in some ways. They brought me on early on as an advisor and a consultant, and I have to say that the first meetings I had with them, it was small. They had a big vision, and I was sort of like, wow, you guys are going to pull this off in New York. Okay, let's see how that goes. And they just really got right in here and did it. And I think it's amazing what they've started here. So I'd like to thank, and I think we all should thank Jerry and his team, Jerry Holton, and Raj and Simon and Artie and Lisa and Jasper and the two Annas and Brandon and the whole team on what they've accomplished so far. So thank you so much. Let's give them all a quick round of applause and a thank you just for today. So I also want to say that, so Jerry came the first day and sort of said, we're charting a course for the future. There have been conversations around smart cities going on for a number of years here, but he is sort of saying, you know what, let's take that and take what we've learned and chart it in a little bit of a different way with a focus on people. So smart cities, power to the people, right? I think that we have heard from amazing speakers, from talking about IoT and data and security and the importance of public-private partnerships and urban mobility and privacy and real estate and all kinds of things. We've seen drones and electric BMW shuttles from Reach Now and Robert Wolf's drones and that whole expo area out there. We've workshopped and smaller groups solving real problems. And I think the themes that we've seen are true to what the mission of this conference was, which is people, right? So all of this technology, like Dan Doctoroff said yesterday, from the internet up, but it all doesn't really matter so much if it's not people focused, if it's not for people. So today we're going to have a little bit more of a focus on entrepreneurship and innovation, a little bit deeper dive. We're going to hear from a whole bunch of folks. We'll have the VC side, we'll have Microsoft's team, John Farmer and his team, and some other folks, and so it's exciting. Innovation and an ecosystem around entrepreneurship, I think, is really important for a thriving tech ecosystem, a thriving people-focused ecosystem, and a thriving future of smart cities ecosystem. So I think that's really, it's been important here in New York, and I think it's going to be important for all of our conversations. You'll hear from this all day, but I think that this is the start of a conversation here. I'm hoping you've enjoyed yourselves as much as I have, and if you come back tomorrow, that's great, and even after tomorrow, continue these conversations. So along the lines of innovation and entrepreneurship, I am going to introduce our first panel, our moderator, Victor Mulas, who runs innovation and entrepreneurship for cities from World Bank. So we can't get a better encapsulation of what the day is going to bring us than that title and that person. And so here is Victor, and enjoy the day, all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you attending this session upstairs, please exit to your left. please welcome Senior Innovation Officer, Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Cities, World Bank, Victor Mulas.
Fantastic. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming early today. It's the last day of the conference, so I appreciate your presence. I am really excited today because we have a very, very interesting panel here about the two passions I have in my work, which is cities and innovation. So just a little bit to introduce everyone that we have in the panel. We have Stephen Kuyan from the NYU Future Lab. He is the managing director of the Future Labs. Then we have Steve Fifita, who is the founding executive director of City Digital at UI Labs in Chicago. Then we have Benoit that is coming from France, from Provence. He is the director of the Camp Urban Lab over there. And then we also have, to close up the panel, another bright example from New York. We have Micah, who is the managing director for Mini at UrbanX. So I want to frame a little bit this panel because we are talking here about incubating the future through urban innovation labs. But what I think we are talking right now, it's about two big trends that are happening in innovation. The first one is urbanization and the role of cities for innovation. We are seeing a trend in the world that more and more the population of the world is becoming urban. We have these statistics coming that most likely by 2050 we will have between 70 to 90% of the world population in urban areas. And we have gone from 10 megacities in the 1990s to 28 megacities in 2014, and we expect to have 41 megacities in 2030. And now when you think about megacities, New York is one of them, but think also about Mexico City, and think about the challenges that emerge there. And all those challenges with the population there are drivers for innovation, because the more challenges you have, the more you want to innovate to solve them. At the same time, we have witnessed another trend that has happened during the last 20 years, which is the compound disruption of technology and how technology is advancing more and more into digital and building upon each other. That has allowed to reduce a lot the cost of innovation, because smaller players could access resources and technologies, think about cloud, think about different resources, but also reduce the cost of innovation dramatically. And that has raised the opportunity for startups to create new disruptive innovation and new businesses. And that has happened primarily in cities because of the agglomeration effects and where all the resources comes together. So that's one of the first trend. And all of you here, all the panel members are working in cities in this environment. The other part of the equation, which I think is interesting to frame this debate, is how the innovation model, the R&D model is changing. It used to be the model of Bell Labs or NASA that you needed a big corporation with a lot of resources to hire the brightest and have a lot of money to have all the materials needed to do innovation and R&D at the top notch. Now that model has changed. You don't need all those resources, and you don't need to be close with the best and the brightest in your company. What you need to do right now is to find as many partners as possible and be as open as possible. So we are seeing a change into open innovation, and corporations are reacting to that. Now, given that we have all these small players, startups accessing these resources and being very rapid, innovation is starting to happen at the startup level. And companies are seeing that these startups are being faster than them and disrupting markets. So how are they adapting to that? How are they embracing these startups and these open innovation models? So I think those are the two big themes that we are seeing happening in innovation, and this panel represents new models that are addressing that and are looking into that. I think what is interesting to start understanding is what is the role of these intermediaries, these new models, and what are they doing? How are they helping addressing gaps in the connection of the players and in the markets to produce this innovation for both corporates, but also to address these new challenges that we are facing. And what is the role of startups in innovation? Because the beauty of the startup is not only can bring new ideas and new innovation ideas, but also applies them, right? So it's the perfect vehicle of applied innovation. We no longer have an R&D that is thinking about problems that are not applicable, and then we need the commercialization. It seems everything is starting to be mixed. So with that introduction, I wanted to start the panel, and the first question is, I'm going to ask them, is a very basic one, which is to introduce their model, their lab, what they do, but in this kind of frame that I propose. So how do you support entrepreneurship and this innovation? How do you look at urban, and what is the urban impact that you see? And what is the corporate link in terms of innovation? So Stephen, if we can start with the Future Labs and give us a little bit of background and what is the Future Labs and what do you do and how do you frame yourself in these categories?
Sure. So the Future Labs are a series of programs and spaces supporting startups in New York City that's done in partnership between NYU, the City of New York, and a number of our partners. We have incubation programs that are seed to Series A that focus on specific areas of technology such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing. At the Data Future Lab, augmented reality, virtual reality, digitization of antiquated industries. At the Digital Future Lab, we have the Urban Future Lab that focuses on smart cities, smart grid urban sustainability. And later this year, we'll open the city's first incubator for veterans, the Veterans Future Lab. And we recently started a number of accelerator programs called the Nexus Labs. The first one just finished in partnership with FF Venture Capital to seed 5 artificial intelligence companies through a unique 7-month accelerator program. I think to your point about the evolution of these programs that support companies, our programs are a reflection of that. It's that there's no real one model that solves all the problems of supporting startups in different cities, and we've sort of adopted our own model in the last couple of years and evolved it to meet with the times and to understand the problems of entrepreneurs as they've evolved. And similarly, as industries have changed, artificial intelligence was not a prominent industry and not a prominent technology when we started, and we had to create a unique program for it. So I think the interesting times that we live in now is that all these cities around the world are starting to create programs that are unique to them. One of the first things that happened with us initially was we developed the first incubator in New York City, and a lot of programs from around the world came to New York City to learn about the model and wrongly exported that model or imported that model to wherever they are. And I think now a lot of cities are understanding that they need to create unique models based on their individual problems. And it's something that we're still doing through our Nexus Lab program.
So 2 follow-up questions very briefly is, you have a unique partnership between university and the city, and I want to dig in the partnership with each one of you. What makes it different to have that connections? Did it help you? What made the...
Of course, I mean, very, very early on, we recognized, and Micah was part of the team, and a number of other folks were part of the original team. We realized that there was nowhere near enough startup activity within just the university to create an incubator. And I think a lot of university incubators realized that not too far after that. So we thought about the different models that we could have created, and one that came to mind was why not use the university resources to power and support the New York City ecosystem. So it's for those of you that are in academia, you may very well know that most faculty members, or the large majority of faculty members, want nothing to do with entrepreneurship, want nothing to do with starting a company, but they're intrigued by the ecosystem and they have a lot to offer and a lot to learn from the ecosystem. So we developed this model where we would be the conduit between the City of New York and NYU, where if you wanted to start a company as an NYU student, faculty members, fine, we have a program for you. But if you didn't, you'd still have this conduit to work with the New York City ecosystem to support and mentor leading startups, and then understand the demands of the ecosystem, understand what job skills are relevant, understand what technologies are being applied to the real world, and then take that back and adjust your curriculum to teach students.
It's fascinating the role you are playing with the university to bring all knowledge and R&D and make it more applicable.
Yeah, and by the way, the resources that the university has are also vital to companies. As a quick example is for especially our artificial intelligence program, access to data sets is the lifeblood of a company. And the university has access to private data sets and closed data sets that most regular companies don't have access to, and having that conduit is very helpful.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to go to Steve because I think this links into UI Labs, which started initially as a partnership of many different people. So if you can walk us through what UI Labs and particularly the City Digital does, but also framing it in this environment of new collaboration and development of R&D and innovation.
You bet. So at UI Labs, we are a collection of two labs built on the premise that the open innovation is actually how innovation needs to happen going forward. The speed of technology, we focus primarily on Internet of Things and big data and advanced computing. And so the large industry level challenges are what we go after. And so the belief is that no one entity, whether it's a university, whether it's corporations, startups, or government, can actually tackle it on their own. So the need for open innovation is actually a requirement. The other piece that we believe in is that the speed with all of this moves, each of those entities need to play to their strengths, right? So if you think about the startup community is that new rapid prototyping function that we used to have, whether it was the Bell Labs platforms or the really deep HP Labs types platforms. I was formerly at HP in the innovation programs there. Then corporation strength from armies of engineers, global channels, history and legacy around R&D have that great ability to ingest and scale. Universities are a great platform for sort of where things are going 10, 20 years out. They also have technology transition platforms, but to your point, there's a couple of stumbling blocks there from a speed standpoint. And then as we think specifically about what's happening in the urban environment, we take a very, very basic product development type of approach, which is you need to get close to the user. And so in this case, that's the city. And so we have a very close relationship with both the municipal players and decision makers, but also at a federal level. And so the notion of open innovation then becomes a co-creation exercise. So speaking to the entrepreneurship part, we then apply an entrepreneurship venture stage gate. So this notion of whether you're Microsoft, which is one of our partners, or MasterCard, or you're one of the startups that we pull from the ecosystem, we level the playing field. And so we act as that neutral arbiter that literally allows the lonely professor from University X to stand up next against Microsoft or MasterCard, which is somewhere where those stumbling blocks come into play. Same thing for the startups as well. What we love about the startups on top of that is that startups are uniquely focused on the use case. They also are literally dealing with a burning platform. And so from a pacing standpoint, if you believe in speed of innovation, we let them sort of lead the charge, again, letting everyone play to their strengths. The rest of our program is very straightforward and entrepreneurial in that joint contribution translates to joint value share. So, 5 inventors in a garage, the model applies to big corporations, small companies, and university as well. And then our key driver, because we're a membership-driven organization, we're a consortium, our corporations are mainly the support mechanism for our business model. So commercialization is a key factor of what we drive against. And so we design, test in the city. The city is, again, another partnership piece for the city is we use the city as a live test lab. Yep. So we're not testing in a building, we're testing in the city, tearing up concrete. Therefore, right-of-way access and access to the data is a critical component. And then at the end, we bring in the structure. So whatever we devise from a design standpoint and what that solution product looks like, we put the structure in after that. So whether it's a joint venture or it's a product that goes into a portfolio of one of our partners or we form a new company, we put the structure in at the end as opposed to the beginning. So I'm a recovering mergers and acquisitions guy from the corporate side. So this is a really refreshing approach where we go design first and end up with structure. Which then, in our opinion, it's showing out in a couple of the spin-outs that we have ready, is that the time to market factor, which is our key metric, is allowing us to get to market a lot faster.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. So Benoit, in your case, you just started Accelerator, but you, before that, the whole structure of the camp, it's a very interesting place. I want you to speak a little bit about it because it's not in a city per se, it's something else. So what is your role and how are you here in this panel? What is your connection with the cities and innovation?
So no, you're right. The camp is not in the city. It's in the middle of nature, in the heart of Provence, south of France. between two key cities, though. There is Marseille, which is the second French city, and Aix-en-Provence, which is the perfect dream life city. So we have an exceptional playground to launch our experimentation there. So basically, it's the first campus dedicated to smart city. It will be a place where people will come to experience and learn about urban innovation. We have three major activities. So the first one is executive education. So we will train people on exponential technologies, a bit like Singularity University does, if you know it. And people would spend 1 week at the camp and have those trainings about what are the key changes arriving in the world. And all the philosophy is learning by doing. We have not a simple classroom, but a lot of experimentation where people will be able to touch innovations. So executive learning is the first piece of it. Then the camp will welcome an accelerator. So we will have 30 smart city startups that will be incubated there. And the third component is a urban lab, so a real organism where we will promote some innovation, where we will showcase, and where we will go into the city and use those playgrounds in Marseille and Aix-en-Provence to run some innovation around energy, education, and mobility. So our key mission, I would say, is to transform people's mindset. So the core component of our project is really executive learning and education. And we take the angle of sustainability topics and social innovation as well. And to answer your question on why the camp is different and what makes us different, this project is a big project. It's a $100 million project funded half by public and private sector. So we have something like 16 corporate partners, and then the rest is funded by the metropole of Marseille, by the region of Provence. And we are a foundation. It means that it's a kind of non-profit organization. Of course, they pay our salaries. Don't tell my boss, but I would have accepted this job without salary anyway. But that makes us a neutral place which can, I would say, aggregate people and put around the table corporate, private, and startups and launch ambitious smart city projects.
Fantastic. So we go to Micah, and I want to just go from very different spaces that we're seeing and very different models, and we go back to an accelerator. And when I was reading about UrbanX accelerator, I saw like, oh, you are like Mini accelerator, Mini like the brand from the BMW, and I was thinking, oh, this is like a corporate accelerator, but you're telling me it's not. So can you explain us what is your model and what is the difference, and how are you taking the accelerator model with the urban side? What is your purpose?
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear. So you have the university model, a consortium model, foundation, not-for-profit model, and UrbanX, which is a model that really is driven by Mini. And Mini has really long been a quintessentially urban brand. So at its inception, has kind of been grounded in this notion of rethinking the status quo of what's possible in cities. And the origin story, for those of you who don't know it, is actually that during the first gas crisis in the late 1950s in London, there was a designer and engineer named Sir Alec Isagonis who developed the first Mini, really as a response to this particularly urban problem of how do Londoners get around. And so the design of the car, the creative use of space of the car, that whole kind of notion of using design to really transform urban life is at the root of what we're doing now. And UrbanX is part of this evolving portfolio of projects at Mini, really designed to look into the future of cities. And we think that one of the best ways to do that is to work really shoulder to shoulder with founders. So we work with entrepreneurs really from all around the world who come to our home base in Greenpoint, just a couple of miles from here. And they're with us for a few months. It's a pretty intense process. We actually invest cash for equity, which I think is different from some other accelerator programs that are backed by corporations. The typical model is to actually outsource that work, to pay someone else to do it, and to not hold the equity yourself. But in the case of UrbanX, Mini actually has skin in the game. We do invest cash for equity, but the cash is nice. I don't think it's really not the reason I think why most people come. Most founders, and just by a show of hands, so how many people here work with a startup or are a founder or have some startup experience? So oh, great, all right, so you all know what I'm talking about. I think a lot of founders kind of start with this notion of a product, right? They've developed something, a solution that they think is really cool. They're not so sure what the business model actually is, or how that product or solution is going to work in the real world. So when they come to UrbanX, they get to work hand in hand with designers and engineers who actually come over from Germany, from Mini and from BMW. We provide them with resources not only to help with the product development side of things, but really to help with the customer development, the business model kind of things. Because I think that's, you hit on this point where big companies are really good at executing on a business model. And in the case of Mini and BMW, it's really been the last business model essentially for almost 100 years. Yeah. And that business model obviously is changing rapidly, as it is in many other industries. And startups are really good at searching, right? They're not burdened by a lot of the same legacy infrastructure as big companies. So they can go out, design, test, iterate, pivot in really, really rapid time cycles. Yeah. And so that's kind of the value proposition for the program, is to give them that experience, to give them an opportunity to do that in the real world, to incorporate that feedback, and then ultimately increase the likelihood and the probability of success in the real world.
Okay, this is fantastic, and I want to ask now, I want to open the floor, whoever wants to answer, we go into that. Because you all have experience in two aspects. One is the accelerator and working with the startups, but also the ecosystem building, right? And going beyond just the startups themselves. You need all the kind of partners. You need to kind of work around an ecosystem of partnerships. Even if it is a pure accelerator, you are looking for working with the city. You are looking for working with corporates to find challenges. You are looking for testing that in a real environment. But it goes a little bit beyond that. When we have work around the world and we've done research on accelerators, we typically don't see them being very successful in terms of self-funding themselves and having results that would help them in developing startups very successful and then getting the self-funding. So many of them are subsidized or have like corporate partnership that helps them because they are looking into different goals. One of the effects we have seen is accelerators help a lot companies in R&D development. That's one of the parts. But also help cities and the innovation ecosystem because they create these partnerships and they go beyond that. So on your perspective, what is your role in both? To support the startup ecosystem in the city or to support the R&D particularly in a company? I think, Micah, the R&D, you cover in that part, but I mean, more broadly, if you think about more companies, not only if it's BMW, and I don't know which one of you wants to answer.
I can start. Quite honestly, the premise upon which we were brought together is that the chasm that you just described, whether it's coming out, there's creation platforms, whether it's coming out of national labs, R&D platforms at corporations, or even within the early stage startup community, right? And that's, I agree with what Micah had to say, is that there's a penchant for exploration there and experimentation, and that's what you want there. And there's capital that's assigned to that, right? And it's generally a cost center within corporations, and so your notion of subsidization isn't something that you need, because commercialization on the back end, when you're actually ringing the cash register, is not part of the exercise at its core. And then on the back end of this, whether it's a corporate scale or startups growing, there is a movement towards business model, and then the notion of making sure that you're sound from a revenue standpoint. You need a mechanism that's focused in the middle, that, and from our perspective anyways, that brings those two exercises together and you still concentrate. And so in a similar fashion, you've got people and capital in that middle component that are aligned around taking, universities call it transition, corporations call it commercialization, and walking it to that larger scaling mechanism, which corporations are great at, or later stage companies, which is at that point you're repeating and doing more of. There are people and capital assigned to that, and so trying to force the exploratory folks to think about commercialization is a really tough exercise. So having a mechanism that allows for that to answer your point directly though around funding, that still tends to be a cost center.
Yeah.
And so taking equity, I think, is a really sound approach that tends to pay later down in scale. But this notion of also taking fee for services is probably the best way to think about it too. So portion of services, portion of fee of subsidization or corporate membership, and then the last piece is if you can take a pay to the upside from an equity standpoint, that's a healthy.
Can I just build on it? So only about like 20% of the companies in our portfolio are B2G, right? Most are B2B.
Okay.
And it's very, very difficult to work with most cities, right? And I think, the smart city space has really gotten sexy in the last couple of years. As sexy, I think, as you can make this. When you're dealing with infrastructure, like it's not really a sexy space. But we're trying. I think we're trying. But I think the smart cities conversation is really dominated probably by about 100 cities, like across the world, right? You see the same cities over and over again at different shows and conferences, and they're leading with research and deployment and so on and so forth. Still very, very difficult to work with cities and to deploy new solutions in cities, because fundamentally, no mayor wants to wind up on the front page of a paper because they tried something new and it failed, and someone got hurt, or it cost taxpayers money, or it didn't work out. There have been a lot of big public failures of technology, right, at the city scale. And again, just to put it in perspective, that the 100-city thing is great, because I think there are university researchers and startups and corporate R&D departments who need sandboxes to test things to show that they work. But again, to put it in perspective, there are about 4,000 cities in the US alone. So there's a real opportunity here to scale. And I would actually argue that in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily about new technology innovation, but it's about finance and financial innovation to get those things to scale.
Benoit, very fast.
Yeah, very fast. In France, we have a big problem because the lead times for cities to buy startup innovation is huge. And just to give you an example, we contribute to accelerate that. Very recently on a mobility project, we did a European fund file in order to gather 5 million euros for a mobility as a service project. So we did that. We did that on behalf of Marseille Urban Authority, and they give us the key of the truck, meaning we would do the RFPs for them. We would have fast-track process to select innovation and startups to get rid of this complexity. So that's also our role to do the bridge making.
And it's fantastic, because I think the role of intermediary and what you mentioned at the beginning with the university professors fits into this.
And I think the only thing I'd add is I think a lot of cities and I think a lot of companies and a lot of corporations and anyone who wants to work with startups has a really good process for setting up that relationship. But I think the problem that we've seen happen a lot more recently than before is the problem of implementing and piloting. I think everyone has a really good process for creating that partnership agreement or the MOU agreement, and no one has a really good process for deploying. And I think that's the missing link that's causing a lot of problems, especially for startups.
So I think it's fantastic perspectives that we're getting here, and I know we are running out of time almost, but I wanted to ask you a last question. You can just summarize in 1-2 sentences. What is the future of your model of the innovation in urban? How do you see the future evolving? If you think about your model, how do you think it's going to be in 5 years from now? Who wants to start?
I'll say that because we've lived it over the last 8 years, and our own model has evolved many times over in the last 8 years. I think the future is going to be an evolution of models. There's no perfect model for supporting startups. There's no perfect model for developing urban innovation hubs. I think it's going to be an evolving model until, and everyone's going to have to create their own unique solutions.
All right. Future of. I think that the profiles of individuals at cities or at corporations or the startups are the revolving door is going to be much faster. So all of them need to be inventors. All of them need to be sort of business oriented. I'm going to steal a little bit from Micah here, but it's about the business model going forward.
Yeah.
The technology is always going to be there, especially in a 3 to 5 year time frame. The technology is available within these communities that we're talking about to scope just about anything. So the business model is going to be more important going forward.
No, so for me it's obvious. We are building the camp #1. In the future, there will be hundreds of the camp all around the world. So get prepared.
So you're not going to hold us to this, right? I think I think the model evolves kind of in 3 ways. So I think number one, I think that the importance of design-driven solutions really continues to increase. Number two, I think the notion of kind of moving from quantified self to supported self accelerates. And I think technology that puts humans at the forefront increases in importance. And I think the third is, at Mini, one other project that we're undertaking is something called Mini Living, which is really focused on connected living and the evolution of urban built environment. And that's a really interesting space. I think you look at the demand for housing in cities like, not only New York, but really around the world, and you see just a massive opportunity. So kind of rethinking real estate, the built environment, being responsive to shifting needs and demand in housing is an area that we're really excited about as well.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to just summarize it that the future will look at technology, looking humans at the forefront of technology to solve the urban challenges. I hope you guys help us all with your models to get there, and I hope to see you in 5 years from now doing that. Thank you very much. It was a very exciting panel. I appreciate it very much.